The moment Troy stepped onto the small wooden stage in the school auditorium, the room went still. It wasn't the usual type of still, where students quiet down before a boring announcement or a test. This was charged, electric, a hush laced with smirks, as if everyone knew something he didn't. From the back row, someone chuckled. "Let's see if the golden voice runs in the family," a boy muttered just loud enough for the row in front to hear. A few others laughed under their breath. Troy didn't look at them. He stood in the center, hands at his sides. Not nervous, not cocky, just still. The old mic stand wobbled slightly as he adjusted it. A faint squeal of feedback screeched through the speakers, followed by silence again. He looked out, not at the faces but through them. Not performing, just preparing. The school talent assembly had become an annual tradition, half serious, half sarcastic, a stage where some kids tried, some mocked, and others coasted. But this one had a different tension, because Troy Harris was here, and Troy Harris was the son of Marcus Harris, a soul singer whose name still echoed on vinyl and radio stations, a man whose voice had once filled stadiums and sparked revolutions. But Marcus Harris had disappeared from the public eye years ago. No press, no performances, just silence. So when Troy walked up, students expected something, a collapse, a punchline, a fake legend. Even the teachers watched closely, curious, not entirely neutral. From the side of the stage, the assistant principal gave a half nod. Troy pressed the button. The backing track began, a slow, stripped-down instrumental. Piano, no drums. Then Troy opened his mouth, and the room changed. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was pure. Clean, unforced notes slid through the mic, clear as water, sharp as sunlight. It wasn't imitation, it was inheritance, reborn. Even the boy who'd mocked him in the back row froze. Teachers leaned forward, phones dropped in laps. No one laughed, no one even breathed. Troy kept singing, eyes closed now, voice low then rising, swelling then steady. His tone didn't ask for approval, it simply existed, like it belonged in the air, like it had always been there. When the last note faded, the silence stayed. For a second, then the applause came. Slow, then growing. Some hesitant, some full force, but no one stayed still. And Troy, he gave a small nod, stepped off the stage, and walked back to his seat. No smile, no bow. He wasn't there to prove anything, but someone had taken notice. At the back of the auditorium, two men in suits stood near the double doors, observing, not clapping, not reacting, just watching. After the assembly, the school halls buzzed. Students whispered his name like it had just entered their consciousness for the first time. Troy, that kid, the Harris boy. But Troy didn't walk like someone who'd just stunned an entire room. He didn't nod at compliments, didn't hang around to bask in the limelight. He kept his headphones on, backpack slung low, footsteps even. He walked alone, not because he was unfriendly, but because he didn't need an audience. At lunch, he sat in his usual spot, corner table, far from the popular clusters and away from the loud banter. He opened a paperback novel, one with creased corners and notes scribbled in the margins. He read slowly, eyes moving deliberately across the page. The noise around him didn't touch him. A group of younger students pointed at him from across the cafeteria. One started to get up, maybe to ask for a video or talk about the performance. But their friend pulled them back, shaking their head. Troy didn't notice. Or maybe he did, and simply chose not to react. At home, the silence was his sanctuary. His aunt, Monica, kept a quiet, orderly home. She wasn't rich, but she was precise. The kind of woman who folded laundry the same day and made tea like a ritual. She didn't talk much about his father, and Troy never asked. The walls of their apartment were decorated with old jazz records and black and white photographs. None of Marcus. Monica never took them down, never added new ones. In the corner of his room, Troy kept an old keyboard. Half the keys were chipped. The pedals stuck sometimes, but it worked. That was all he needed. He didn't chase streams or views. He didn't upload covers or tag music scouts. He sang because it kept him still. balanced, honest. Each night after homework and dishes, he played a few notes. Not songs, just pieces, ideas, half-thought melodies that would drift into the air and dissolve. That's who he was. Not Marcus Harris's son, not a viral moment, just Troy. And that quiet steadiness, his refusal to perform for the world unless he chose to, was what made him dangerous to people who wanted control. People like the two men who'd watched from the auditorium doors. It was the next day. Troy was called to the front office during third period. No reason given, just a short message passed from one student aide to another until it reached his desk. He folded his notebook closed, tucked his pencil behind his ear, and walked out without a word. The front office was unusually quiet. Ms. Franklin, the school's secretary, sat at her desk but avoided eye contact as he stepped in. Her fingers tapped nervously against her mug. The clock above her ticked too loudly. A printer in the corner whirred but didn't print. "Troy," she said almost too gently, "they're waiting for you in the conference room." "They?" She hesitated. "Some gentleman from an agency, music-related." He gave a slow nod and walked toward the frosted glass door labeled Conference Room A. Inside sat two men in charcoal gray suits, crisp shirts, and government posture. One of them stood as Troy entered. "Mr. Harris, thanks for coming." Troy closed the door behind him. "Have a seat," the other said. "No need to be nervous. We're just here to talk." Troy sat without a word. The first man, taller, clean-shaven, a sharp fold in his collar, smiled with practiced ease. His ID badge hung from a sleek black lanyard that said National Talent Outreach Initiative, an organization Troy had never heard of. "My name's Mr. Lorne. This is Mr. Eckhart. We're consultants for the NTOI, an independent branch that works with emerging student performers. We monitor school showcases across the country, and yesterday's performance caught our attention." Troy said nothing. He just looked at them, not hostile, not impressed. Mr. Eckhart leaned in, his tone calm but deliberate. "You've got a gift, son, but gifts like that need direction, guidance. You don't want to waste it playing in cafeterias or open mics." Mr. Lorne nodded, folding his hands. "What we offer is mentorship, selective, elite access to programs not available to the public, exclusive showcases, introductions to producers, training camps with industry legends." Troy tilted his head slightly. "And this is through the school?" No, Mr. Lorne smiled. "Separate, discreet. You've been pre-flagged as high potential. These things move quietly before they go official. It's standard." Something in his voice was too smooth. "Pre-flagged by who?" Troy asked. The room paused. Lorne glanced briefly at Eckhart, then recovered. "Let's just say we have partners with access to certain evaluation systems. Yesterday was your unofficial audition." Troy stared. That was a school event, not a stage. Mr. Eckhart leaned back, folding his arms. "Look, Troy, we're not here to argue definitions. We're here to give you an opportunity. But it requires commitment, cooperation, and discretion," Lorne added. Troy's eyes narrowed. "What if I'm not interested?" Another pause. Lorne's smile stayed, but it no longer reached his eyes. "Well, that would be disappointing, especially given your background." He said it carefully, like a loaded word in disguise. Troy didn't bite. "My background?" Eckhart spoke now, quieter. "Your father was a legend, Troy. But legends leave shadows. You don't want to fall into his pattern. Brilliant but wasted. Disappeared." The air in the room cooled. Troy sat up straighter, his voice even. "Is this really about mentorship?" "Of course," Lorne said too quickly. "We just want to help." But Troy had been in enough rooms with people who said they wanted to help, only to use, sell, and discard. His father had met those men too, before he vanished. The suits didn't know it, but the moment they mentioned Marcus Harris, they'd said too much. This wasn't about music. It was about ownership. The silence in the room wasn't awkward. It was intentional. Troy let it stretch, let it bend. The two men across from him exchanged glances that weren't panicked, but they'd felt the shift. Something had changed. Troy didn't twitch, didn't fidget. He simply leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice low and calm. You said this was about helping me, but I haven't seen a single credential. No cards, no school approval. Just words. Mr. Lauren reached into his blazer pocket immediately, too quickly, and slid a business card across the table. It was matte black, white print, sparse. NTOI, National Talent Outreach Initiative. No phone number, no physical address, just a vague email and a QR code. Troy picked it up, studied it, then flipped it. Blank. He set it down again, face up. Anyone can print a card, he said. Eckhart's jaw flexed slightly. You think this is fake? I think people who work in the dark usually do it for a reason. Troy folded his arms now. So tell me, what exactly do you want me to do? Lauren's smile thinned. Just attend a weekend session. Private, off campus. Coaches, scouts, fast-track placement into national competitions. One door opens another. You want me to sign anything? There's a small NDA, yes. Standard protocol. Standard for who? Again, no answer. Troy nodded slowly. So you want me to leave town, meet unknown people, sign a document I can't show anyone, and trust that it's all for my benefit? Lauren sat back, exhaling through his nose. You're cautious. That's good. But let's not pretend this is unusual. The entertainment world is built on access. If you want in, you take calculated steps. No one's forcing you. But you are pressuring me, Troy said evenly. Subtly. You came here during school hours. You went around my teachers, around my aunt. That's not guidance, that's intrusion. Eckhart shifted. His fingers tapped the table now. You're reading this wrong, kid. No, Troy said softly. You picked the wrong kid to read. From outside the frosted glass, a shadow moved. The door creaked open. Miss Franklin, the school secretary, poked her head in. Sorry to interrupt, gentlemen, she said, eyes flicking briefly to Troy. The principal would like a word with the student. Mr. Lauren's smile tightened. We're in the middle of something important. Ms. Franklin didn't flinch. It wasn't a request. Troy stood. Thank you for your offer, he said. But I think we're done. Eckhart's voice lowered into something almost threatening. You might regret walking away from this. Troy turned at the door, his expression unreadable. My father once told me, if you ever feel trapped in a room you didn't ask to be in, speak like you own the exit. Then he walked out. In the hallway, Principal Gaines was waiting. She didn't smile. Troy, walk with me. They moved together down the corridor. I didn't invite those men, she said. They didn't come through district channels, claimed they had clearance, but none of it checks out. Troy looked over. Then why'd you let them in? She didn't answer right away. I thought maybe they were legit. They used your father's name, said they had legal documentation. They don't. She nodded. I believe you now. They turned a corner. Miss Franklin trailed behind them, quietly dialing someone on her phone. You're not in trouble, Principal Gaines added, but I need you to be honest with me. Have they contacted you before this? No. Did they give you anything? Troy handed her the card. She scanned it, then handed it to Miss Franklin. Have our district IT pull metadata from that QR code. Find the source server. Then she looked back at Troy. You handled that room like someone with experience. I've seen enough to recognize a con dressed as a suit. She gave a small, tight nod. Stay close today. You'll have an escort. Troy didn't argue. He didn't ask who. He just walked back to class, slow and measured, as if nothing had happened. But he knew what they had wanted. Not just his voice, not just his talent. They wanted his name. And now that he had refused, the game had changed. By fourth period, the school was no longer calm. Not loud, but alert. Wordless. The kind of atmosphere that buzzes under the surface before a storm. Troy sat in chemistry class while Principal Gaines coordinated in the background. Discreet security, school district officials, and someone from the Department of Education. The QR code had been traced to a server in Nevada, unregistered. The so-called National Talent Outreach Initiative didn't exist. Not officially. Not anywhere. But that wasn't even the strange part. One of the surveillance cameras near the main entrance had footage of Lauren and Eckhart arriving. They weren't alone. A third figure, someone never introduced, never signed in, had slipped in behind them. A woman, no visible badge, no eye contact with the staff. She lingered outside the conference room the entire time Troy was inside, then disappeared into a side hallway just before the meeting ended. That, more than anything, unsettled Principal Gaines. Who was she? And why was she watching? By fifth period, two unmarked government vehicles pulled up outside. No sirens, no rush. A quiet presence. Out stepped two actual federal agents. Their demeanor was different, more precise, confident without performance. Special Agent Mara Fields led the pair. Slim, direct, eyes like glass. She walked into the main office, nodded once at Ms. Franklin, and quietly asked for all the surveillance logs from the last 48 hours. Meanwhile, Troy was pulled from class again, this time by a name he hadn't heard in years. Mr. Troy Harris? He turned. The speaker was tall, dark-skinned, early 40s, with tired eyes and a U.S. Marshal's badge clipped to his belt. My name's Damon Calloway. I worked with your father. Troy froze in place. Calloway waited. They moved to a quiet corridor near the art wing, far from traffic. I know this is coming at you fast, the marshal said, but I need to ask, did either of those men mention your father by name? Yes. Did they offer documents? Number just vague promises, fake programs. Calloway's jaw tightened. He took out his phone and showed Troy a photo. Grainy, time-stamped 2 weeks earlier. It showed the same woman who'd lingered outside the conference room, this time near a studio lot in Nashville. She's not with any agency. We believe she's part of a private organization, unregulated, offshore funded, designed to intercept and control talent pipelines before they go public. Troy's brow furrowed. Why? Calloway's voice dropped. Because your father said no. That single sentence rippled like a fracture across the hallway. Calloway continued. Marcus Harris was one of the most gifted voices this country ever had, but he refused to sell it. He walked away from record deals, publishing houses, even international contracts, said he wouldn't sign away his freedom for a stage. Troy clenched his fists. They came after him. Calloway nodded. We think so. He disappeared 6 months after rejecting one particular opportunity, offered by men who never gave names. We've been tracking similar patterns ever since. Young talents, mostly black, all approached early, all pushed into fast-track contracts, most vanished from the public eye within 2 years. And no one talks about it? They bury it under scandals, rehab stories, bankruptcies, easy to manipulate narratives when the press is on payroll. Troy leaned against the wall, eyes focused on nothing. And now they're trying again. Through me. You carry the same gift, the same bloodline, and they hate when they lose control of something twice. Agent Mara Fields entered the hallway, quiet but certain. Marshal Calloway, she said. We've ID'd the woman. She handed him a file. Calloway opened it, eyes scanning fast. Then he looked at Troy. She was present at 2 other school visits in Atlanta and Detroit. Both cases involved missing minors. Authorities were blocked from investigating further. Fields added, her alias shifts, but she's part of a shell entity called Horizon Pathways. They operate under different names across states, always linked to youth talent scouting, but always off books. Troy took the file. What happens now? We keep you safe, Calloway said, and we take this higher. Fields turned to him. Are you ready to go public? Troy looked her straight in the eyes. My voice isn't for sale, and my silence isn't either. By the end of the school day, Lorne and Eckhart were detained, not by loud arrests, but by firm federal questions they couldn't wriggle out of. Both men tried to deflect, claimed they were part of an outreach program, claimed they had verbal contracts, but their body language told the truth. Eckhart began sweating. Lorne, who had been all confidence hours earlier, now looked like a salesman caught selling snake oil to a scientist. They couldn't name their employer, couldn't explain the woman in the footage, couldn't even explain the contents of the NDA they'd intended for Troy to sign, because it wasn't a real NDA. It was a legal funnel, waiving rights of likeness, voice, and intellectual property to an unnamed entity. Agent Fields let them bury themselves in contradictions. And Troy? He stood in the hallway, arms folded, watching it all unfold through the window of the admin office. Quiet, calm, in control. The school bell rang, but no one moved like usual. There was a hush, like a room just after glass breaks. Troy stood with Agent Mara Field just inside the main administrative wing. Students passed in twos and threes down the halls, whispering. Some glanced at him. Most didn't know what was happening, only that something had shifted, something real. Inside the conference room, behind the glass door, Lorne and Eckhart were no longer men in control. Their jackets were off, their voices sharp and rising, like men trying to remember who they were before everything unraveled. Principal Gaines stood outside the room, arms folded, back straight. Her eyes held no doubt anymore. "Do you want to go in there?" she asked Troy, voice quiet. "No," Troy said. "They've already heard me." That was the difference now. Earlier they'd summoned him. Now they couldn't even speak about him without permission. Two unmarked government vehicles pulled up, this time with formal backup. U.S. Marshals, one Homeland Security agent, and a legal representative from the Department of Youth Protection. They entered quietly. No flashing lights, no shouting, just steel-toed footsteps and unspoken weight. When they walked into the office, Ms. Franklin didn't even flinch. She simply slid the sign-in book forward and said, "They're in the back." A marshal nodded. "We'll take it from here." Inside the room, Lorne rose halfway when they entered. "This is a mistake," he said quickly. "We're here under Education Protocol 47B, subsection Youth Recruitment." "No such protocol exists," said one of the agents without looking up from the tablet. Eckhart held up his hands. "We've got clearance. Ask anyone at—" "You listed a non-existent office in Seattle as your headquarters. That building was condemned 2 years ago," the agent interrupted, "and your QR code links to a private server routed through Bulgaria." Lorne turned to Principal Gaines. "We were trying to give this kid an opportunity." She didn't say a word. Instead, she stepped aside as the agents flanked both men. By impersonating federal talent officers, distributing fraudulent legal documents, and attempting to lure a minor off school property without guardian consent? The female marshal asked. The silence said everything. The agents pulled IDs, but not for Lorne and Eckhart. Warrants for impersonation of a federal agency, for endangering a minor, for conspiracy to traffic under false pretenses. Eckhart muttered, "This is insane. We're not criminals, we're scouts." "You're predators," Agent Field said from the doorway. Her voice was calm. "You're just wearing ties instead of ski masks." They didn't resist, because they couldn't. Their confidence, so sharp just hours ago, had evaporated like steam under a cold light. As they were led outside, students lining the windows saw two suited men being walked calmly but firmly to the black vans. No cuffs, no shouting, just truth laid bare. One girl whispered, "Wait, is that about Troy?" Another boy muttered, "He told the school they were fake." Someone else said, "His dad was famous, right?" Maybe they came for that. In less than 60 seconds, the rumor became something else. Respect. Back in the hallway, Troy leaned against the wall, his bag slung over one shoulder. His hands were steady now. Principal Gaines approached. "You understand how serious this was, right?" "I do," she nodded. "You didn't panic. You didn't overreact. You asked the right questions. I watched people ask the wrong ones for too long." Behind them, Marshal Calloway was on the phone, reporting to a federal database about similar incidents in 3 other states. Mara Fields approached Troy again. "They'll try again," she said softly. "Maybe not you, maybe someone else. But the pattern doesn't stop unless people like you speak out." "I don't want to be famous," and he said. "I just want to sing without being owned." "That's exactly why they wanted you." He looked at her, quiet but unwavering. "Now they know they can't have me." After school, Troy stepped outside. The sky had turned a deep copper, late afternoon light stretching long shadows across the pavement. A few kids were waiting near the front. One of them, a younger boy from band class, walked up and said, "Hey, that song you sang? That was the realest thing I've heard in my life." Troy gave him a small nod. "Thanks. You gonna sing again?" Troy thought for a second. "Yeah," he said, "but next time on my terms." The boy smiled and jogged off. Troy stood for a moment longer, looking up at the sky. The quiet wasn't empty. It was earned. 2 days after the arrests, Troy's name wasn't just whispered in the school hallways. It was on regional education boards, independent watchdog lists, and even quietly circulated within certain federal departments. Not for fame, not for scandal, but as a flag. A red one. And where there's one red flag, there are others. Agent Mara Fields had seen it before. Different states, different kids, different stories, but the same anatomy underneath. Young Black or Latino boys with talent, charm, or famous bloodlines. Kids who either didn't have a full support system or stood out enough to be tempting targets. The pattern was always similar. Someone pretending to be a talent recruiter, scout, or government education agent approached them, offered contracts, promised high schools that doubled as elite academies or fast-track federal arts programs. It always sounded half true. That was the trick. They preyed on confusion. They wrapped control in opportunity. And the minute a student or parent asked the wrong question, or no question at all, the door closed behind them, and they were gone. When the Department of Youth Protection cross-checked Lauren and Eckhart's movements with data from the last 3 months, it became clearer. They'd targeted 11 schools in 4 states, all with minority-majority student populations, all in neighborhoods that had been historically underfunded. Why? Because that's where big dreams lived with the least protection. 2 of the kids they'd approached hadn't been seen in over a week. One had reportedly gone to a conservatory out of state, but no such conservatory existed. They weren't just con men. They were part of a pipeline, a quiet, efficient network of recruiters working beneath the radar. Not for record labels, not for sports teams, for something much darker, something that wore the mask of prestige while feeding into private trafficking circuits, illegal sponsorship deals, and even organ testing rings, according to earlier intel. And it had been working for years. Why? Because these weren't the kind of criminals that kicked down doors or robbed banks. They wore polished shoes and brought paperwork. They spoke in fluent legalese. And they relied on the fact that no one would question authority that sounds official. Troy's case did something rare. It interrupted the system. Not because he fought with fists or even ran away, but because he noticed what didn't feel right and said it out loud, to the right person, at the right moment. It didn't just save him, it exposed the kind of darkness that hides in plain sight, smiling, signing contracts, and calling itself an opportunity. Within weeks, new guidelines were quietly rolled out at regional school levels. No adult could approach a student on campus without pre-verified credentials. Visiting recruiters needed biometric ID clearance and district approval. Principals across several states were warned to be wary of programs promising federal sponsorship without confirmed documentation. It was late, but not too late, not for Troy. Troy never asked to be part of a larger pattern, but he became a crack in the mirror that forced others to see what was being reflected. And it wasn't just his story anymore. It was a warning to schools, to parents, to anyone who believed that because something looked official, it couldn't possibly be harmful. Weeks passed. The news cycle had moved on. There were no more agents, no more cars with dark windows outside the school, no strange men in suits waiting in hallways. Life at Lincoln High School slid back into its usual rhythm. Students grumbled about tests. Teachers reminded them about permission slips and projects. The football team lost their playoff chance in a brutal fourth-quarter collapse. Everything seemed normal again, but not for Troy, and not in a bad way. He wasn't the same boy who had once lowered his eyes every time someone mentioned his last name. People didn't look at him with sarcasm anymore. Not the teachers, not his classmates, not even the ones who used to mock him with jokes about being a backup singer's mistake or a fake version of a real star. Now they saw him differently, not as the son of, but as the boy who had spoken when it counted, the boy who had stood alone in a room full of lies and held his ground without raising his voice. And when the school finally decided to restart the arts showcase after the scandal, it was Principal Gaines herself who made the call. She walked up to Troy one morning and simply said, "We're opening with your song. No auditions. It's yours if you want it." On the night of the showcase, the auditorium was full. Families packed the benches. Teachers took front row seats. Even a few regional reporters came, curious to see the boy at the center of a story that had touched a federal nerve. Backstage, Troy stood alone. He wasn't nervous. Not in the way he used to be. He understood now that singing wasn't just something he inherited. It was something he carried. Not for attention, not for fame, but because it was his voice. His. No contract, no fake agent, no father's shadow, just him. He stepped into the light. The room went silent. Then the piano started. He sang something new, something he'd written weeks earlier, when everything had felt like it was unraveling. It wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy, but it was real. It held the pain of a boy who had been doubted, the quiet rage of someone nearly taken, and the calm strength of someone who knew who he was now. The final note faded, the lights dimmed. There was a beat of silence, then thunderous applause, not polite, not pity, respect. After the show, his mother hugged him backstage. She didn't cry. She didn't say much, just looked him in the eyes and whispered, "You sound like yourself now." Troy smiled. For once, he believed it. In the months that followed, Troy didn't join any national shows. He didn't sign any label deals. He stayed in school, focused on finishing the year. He helped out in the music room, mentored a few younger kids who were scared to speak up in class. And sometimes, on quiet days, he sang, not for an audience, just to remind himself that the voice inside him was still his. He never became famous, but that's what made him powerful. Because Troy didn't chase a spotlight, he reclaimed something far rarer in this world: agency. He would never forget what happened. Not the fake agents, not the pressure, not the eyes watching him, waiting for him to say yes, and definitely not the moment he stood up and simply said, "No." The loudest thing you'll ever say is the truth you don't let anyone take from you.